April 1945. The whole of Germany was collapsing like a sandcastle hit by a wave. Smoke rolled over shattered towns. Church bells were silent, and the sound of tank tracks had replaced bird song. In the chaos, the once mighty Wehrmacht was a ghost of itself. Its proud soldiers replaced by terrified boys, barely old enough to shave. The Nazis called them Hitlerjugend, child defenders of the fatherland. But truth was, they were just kids. Schoolboys pulled from classrooms, farmhands who'd never seen a city, and paper-thin teenagers who didn't even understand what dying for the Reich meant. Some were only 13, standing barefoot in the cold mud, holding rifles taller than they were, their uniforms hanging loose, belts tied twice around their waists just to stay on. Their instructors, grizzled old officers with shaking hands and hollow eyes, screamed that the Americans were demons who would burn them alive. The boys believed it, because that's all they'd ever been told. Every morning they lined up and swore an oath to a Führer they'd never met, their voices cracking from fear, not loyalty. And when the thunder of American artillery began rolling closer each day, they clutched their rifles tighter, whispering prayers their mothers had taught them, even though most of them hadn't seen their mothers in months. Across the Rhine River, the U.S. 69th Infantry was advancing fast. Tough, tired, mud-soaked men who'd seen too much death to still be scared. But when they first caught sight of these enemy soldiers through their binoculars, they didn't see Nazis. They saw children. Sergeant Joe Turner from Kentucky later said, "Hell, I thought they were some lost Boy Scouts till I saw the swastika patches. The GIs could have opened fire. They didn't. Instead, they moved in slow, cautious, shouting through megaphones for them to drop their weapons. Some boys tried to run. Others just froze, paralyzed, crying silently as American tanks surrounded them. When they were finally captured, they didn't look like enemies. They looked like scared kids caught doing something wrong. One boy, no older than 12, handed over his rifle, trembling so bad he could barely hold it. A soldier offered him a Hershey bar from his pocket. The kid stared at it like it was gold, then took a tiny bite and started crying. In that single moment, the war, for him, was over. The Americans didn't see victory. They saw tragedy. These weren't Hitler's warriors anymore. They were lost sons of a dying nation, too young to understand why they were fighting, and too broken to realize that mercy had just found them. The next morning, the fog lay heavy over the German countryside, thick as smoke, as columns of captured boys were led down a dirt road toward an abandoned farmhouse the Americans had turned into a temporary holding area. Their faces were gray with exhaustion, uniforms torn, helmets hanging crooked like oversized tin bowls. Some still clutched their rifles even after surrendering, as if letting go meant they'd vanish completely. The American soldiers didn't bark orders or shove them. They just watched in quiet disbelief. Private Louis Lou Jenkins from Chicago whispered to his buddy, "Jesus, man, look at 'em. They ain't soldiers. They're just kids." A few of the younger GIs, barely 20 themselves, looked like they might cry. They'd seen German SS units commit horrors across Europe. But this wasn't that. This was different. One of the boys, maybe 15, limped forward on a blood-soaked sock, his boot lost somewhere back in the woods. A medic stopped him, crouched down, and carefully wrapped his foot with a strip of clean gauze. The kid flinched, expecting a hit, but none came. The medic just patted his shoulder and said softly, "You're all right now, kid. War's over for you." Another boy, shaking so hard his rifle clattered to the ground, looked up at the tall, broad American standing over him, a Texan named Corporal Danny Moore, and whispered in broken English, "You kill me now." Danny just stared, stunned, then took off his own jacket and draped it over the boy's shoulders. "Nah," he said quietly, "ain't nobody dying today." The rest of the unit followed suit, passing around blankets, sharing cigarettes, handing out rations of corned beef and canned peaches. Some of the kids didn't know what to do with the food. They opened the tins like it was treasure, eating in slow disbelief, eyes darting up as if someone would snatch it away. When one soldier gave a little blond boy a stick of chewing gum, the kid didn't even chew it. He just held it in his hand, smiling through tears. For the first time in years, these boys felt human again. And for the GIs, men who'd stormed beaches, crossed rivers, and watched friends die, this quiet surrender hit harder than any firefight. Because this wasn't just the fall of an army, it was the collapse of a generation that never had a chance to grow up. That night, around the campfire, as the American soldiers sat smoking under a cold moon, one of them said softly, "Guess we didn't just beat Hitler's army. We rescued his kids." The convoy rumbled west for hours through what was left of Germany. Villages flattened to dust, bridges snapped like toothpicks, and the smell of smoke still hanging in the air. When the trucks finally stopped, the boys found themselves at a place the Americans had turned into a temporary camp on the edge of a meadow, its fences newly built and its watchtowers made from raw pine. But this wasn't the kind of camp they'd been told to fear. No snarling dogs, no shouting guards, no beatings, just tired GIs in rolled-up sleeves handing out water and pointing toward the chow line. The Americans called it Camp Ashford. Nobody knew who Ashford was, maybe some officer back home, but soon the name meant something the boys had almost forgotten: safety. They were fed warm stew, slices of bread thick with butter, and even cups of hot coffee that most of them could barely hold because their hands were shaking so badly. That first night, instead of artillery, they heard a harmonica drifting through the dark, soft and mournful, played by some kid from Missouri who said he used to play on his front porch before the draft. A few of the German boys cried quietly into their blankets, not from fear, but from the ache of realizing they might actually live. When the Red Cross women arrived a week later, American nurses in crisp khaki uniforms, their hair tucked neatly under caps, the camp changed again. They walked among the tents with calm, patient voices, patching wounds, offering soap, teaching the boys how to wash properly again. One nurse, a tall brunette named Margaret from Iowa, bent down to clean the cut on a 14-year-old's cheek and said, "Hold still, honey." The word honey hit him harder than any bullet could have, a word so soft it cracked through the armor the war had welded around his heart. Within days, the boys began to smile, timid at first, then freely. They played soccer with empty cans, tried to copy the Americans' slang, and fell asleep each night with full bellies and something new beating inside them. Hope. In the middle of a continent that had forgotten what mercy looked like, Camp Ashford became a strange little island of it, glowing faintly under a battered sky. It was a gray, windy afternoon when Anna McCarthy, one of the Red Cross nurses from Ohio, noticed a boy sitting behind the medical tent, knees pulled to his chest, staring at the dirt like he could fall right through it. He couldn't have been more than 14, his cheeks hollow, his eyes the color of old smoke. His name was Carl, a name she'd read off a small mud-stained tag tied around his neck. When Anna approached, he flinched like a beaten dog, his shoulders locking tight. She crouched down, speaking softly, her Midwestern accent rolling like warm syrup through the cold air. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, "you hurtin' anywhere?" He didn't answer, just shook his head and muttered, "Ich bin allein, ich bin allein," over and over. "I am alone." Anna didn't understand the words, but she didn't need to. She knew the sound of loss when she heard it. She gently reached out, touched his arm, and felt him trembling under her fingers. "You're not alone anymore, kid," she whispered. For a second, nothing happened. Then his lip quivered and the dam broke. The boy's face crumpled and he started to cry. Not the quiet tears of shame, but full, heaving sobs that tore through the silence like thunder. He buried his face in her shoulder, clutching her sleeve with small, desperate hands, and she just held him, rocking slightly, whispering, "It's all right, baby. You're safe now. You're safe." All around the yard, the other boys watched, stunned. One by one, they began to crumble too. Some turning away to hide it, others dropping to their knees, shaking as the weight of everything they'd been forced to carry finally broke loose. The guards didn't stop them. The GIs just stood there, hats off, looking down like they were standing in a church. For months, these boys had been told the Americans were monsters, that they'd skin them alive, burn them, crush them without mercy. But what they found here wasn't hatred, it was grace, and it was too much to bear. That night, after Carl finally fell asleep in the infirmary cot, Anna sat on a wooden crate outside the tent, staring up at the stars. One of the soldiers, a lanky kid from Texas named Danny, walked by and asked, "You all right, ma'am?" She nodded slowly. "Yeah," she said, her voice catching. "Just wish the world had been kinder to them sooner." And somewhere beyond the wire, the wind carried the faint sound of a harmonica playing "You Are My Sunshine," the same tune that would echo through the camp for weeks, a lullaby for lost children who had finally found a home. As the weeks drifted by, Camp Ashford began to feel less like a prison and more like a second chance. The barbed wire still stood, but it didn't look menacing anymore. It looked like the boundary of something fragile worth protecting. The boys were changing. Their hollow faces had filled out. Their eyes no longer darted at every loud sound, and laughter, real laughter, had started to echo through the camp like music. The American nurses, led by Anna and Margaret, had set up a little wooden table outside the mess tent where the boys could come and write letters home. Most didn't even know if anyone would read them. Some had no homes left, some no family at all, but they wrote anyway, their words shaky and unsure, full of hope they didn't dare to admit out loud. Anna would help translate, her voice soft as she read their halting sentences. "Dear Mother, I am alive. The Americans are kind. I eat every day. Please forgive me." Sometimes the boys would break down mid-sentence, and she'd just take their hand and whisper, "Go on, sweetheart. Keep writing. Someone will hear you." Slowly, the letters began to feel like small prayers drifting across a broken world. The Red Cross women brought books, sketch pads, even a few radios. The boys learned to draw again. Houses, rivers, families, the pieces of life they'd been told to forget. The soldiers taught them how to throw a baseball, and the camp rang with shouts of "Catch it!" and laughter that carried all the way to the trees. Every evening, someone would start humming "You Are My Sunshine," and the whole camp would join in, rough voices blending with the harmonica until the air itself felt warm. Some of the GIs joked that the kids were turning into little Americans. Others said they'd never seen anything holier in their lives. Karl, the quiet boy from Leipzig, started speaking English well enough to joke with the guards. He told Anna once, "You, my family now." She smiled, ruffling his hair, and said, "Then I guess that makes me your mom, huh?" He nodded shyly and whispered, "Mutti." That word stuck. Soon the others were saying it too, "Mutti, Mutti," calling those women mother, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And none of the nurses corrected them. Because they weren't just tending to prisoners anymore. They were raising sons, Sons who'd come from the ruins, who'd been taught to hate, and who were finally learning how to be human again. By the time the leaves began to fall in late 45, Camp Ashford had turned into something no one expected. A patch of peace in a world still trying to remember what peace even looked like. But that morning, as a convoy of olive-drab trucks rolled up under a gray Ohio sky, everyone knew the moment had come. Orders had arrived from Washington. The underage German POWs were going home. The camp felt different that day, too quiet, like the air was holding its breath. The boys lined up with small duffel bags slung over their shoulders, wearing freshly washed uniforms that hung loose on their still-growing frames. Some had tucked sketches or baseball cards in their pockets, keepsakes from their time in America. The women, Anna, Margaret, Ruth, and the others, stood near the gate. None of them said much. They just watched, hearts heavy, as the boys they'd fed, nursed, and scolded like sons prepared to leave. Carl was near the front of the line, standing taller than when he'd arrived. His face looked older, not in years, but in understanding. In his hand he clutched a folded piece of paper, a drawing he'd made for Anna the night before. It showed a woman holding a boy's hand under a bright sunrise with 3 words scrawled in shaky English: "My American Mother." When he reached her, she tried to smile, but it cracked halfway. "You're sure you remember your English?" she asked, half joking, half hoping he'd stay just a little longer. He grinned shyly. "Yes, ma'am. Baseball, pancakes, and freedom," he said, the last word catching in his throat. Anna reached out, pulled him into a hug, and whispered, "You take care of yourself, sweetheart. You've got a good heart. Don't let the world harden it again." As the engines started up, the women waved from behind the fence. Margaret passed out the last of the Hershey bars, telling each boy, "One for the road. Don't forget who gave it to you." A few soldiers tried to keep things light, joking about seeing these kids in college one day, but most had watery eyes behind their sunglasses. When the first truck rolled forward, the boys leaned over the rails, waving frantically, shouting, "Goodbye, Mooty, goodbye," over the roar of engines. Someone pulled out a harmonica, Jenkins from Chicago, and started playing "You Are My Sunshine." The notes floated across the yard, trembling, soft, until the convoy disappeared down the long dirt road. Then came the silence, deep, aching, final. Anna pressed the drawing to her chest and whispered, "Goodbye, my boy," as tears finally spilled down her cheeks. That night, when the camp lights flickered out, the nurses sat together in the mess hall, cups of cold coffee untouched, each lost in her own thoughts. No one said it aloud, but they all knew the war had ended twice for them. Once when Germany surrendered, and again that day when their boys went home. And for the first time, Anna realized something that would stay with her for the rest of her life. Sometimes love isn't about keeping people close. It's about helping them find their way back home. 20 years later, the war was a memory the world tried to file away. Yellowed photos in attics, medals gathering dust, and old soldiers staring too long at the horizon. Anna McCarthy was no longer the young Red Cross nurse who'd patched up scared boys in Camp Ashford. Her hair had silvered, her hands trembled a little when she poured her morning coffee, but her heart still carried the echoes of that strange, gentle peace she'd once helped build behind barbed wire. She'd married a farmer, raised 2 kids of her own. But sometimes when the radio played "You Are My Sunshine," she'd have to sit down, close her eyes, and let the memories roll over her like waves. The laughter, the broken English, the word "mooty" whispered by trembling voices. Then, one bright afternoon in 1965, a letter arrived in her mailbox. Foreign stamps, careful handwriting. She sat on the porch with her glasses perched low and opened it slowly. The paper was thick, and the first words made her breath hitch. "Dear Mrs. McCarthy, I don't know if you remember me. My name is Carl. You once called me your son." Her eyes blurred as she read on. Carl wrote from a small town in Bavaria where he now works as a school teacher. He told her about his wife, his 2 children, and the tiny garden where he grew wildflowers because they remind me of Ohio. He wrote how the Americans had treated him not as an enemy, but as a boy who still had a life worth saving. He said it changed everything. That when he taught his students about the war, he didn't talk about hate or glory. He talked about compassion and how sometimes mercy wins bigger battles than guns ever could. At the bottom of the letter, he'd drawn another picture. This time of an old woman and a grown man sitting on a porch under a big tree, smiling. Underneath, he'd written, "You were right. Love makes us free." Anna pressed the paper to her heart and cried, not from sadness, but from the quiet joy of knowing that somewhere across the ocean a boy she'd once called son had made it, had chosen kindness in a world that had once tried to destroy it. She took out her old keepsake box from the war, faded photos, a Red Cross pin, and Carl's first drawing from the camp. Side by side, she placed the new one next to it. That evening, as the sun sank low and the cicadas hummed, she whispered into the golden light, "You made it home, my boy." And though no one else heard it, somewhere deep in her heart, she could almost swear a young voice answered back, "Danke, Mutti." And that, my friends, is where our story ends. But not really. Because stories like this don't ever truly end, do they? They stay with us, tucked somewhere deep in the heart. The tale of those German boys and the American women who called them sons isn't just about war or peace. It's about what it means to be human. About how kindness can reach across barbed wire, across languages, even across oceans, and turn enemies into family. If you felt something listening to this, If it made you think, or maybe even tear up a little, then hey, you're part of that story now too. So before you head out, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next one. I've got a lot more stories from history, untold, powerful, and deeply human, waiting for you. And as always, thank you for spending your time here with me. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and remember, even in the darkest times, compassion can still light the way.